Good evening. How is everybody tonight? My name is Vicki Hefner, and I'm the Education Curator here at the Berks History Center. And thank you especially for coming out on a night that's not so nice. So thank you very much. And welcome to the Berks History Center. We're excited about tonight's special event with Brian Engelhardt. He is a former trustee of the Berks History Center. He served 6 years and just recently rotated off the board in June. So we're happy to have him here tonight. I want to invite you all to our next second Saturday program, which is on October the 11th. Mike Harris will be returning here. He was here about a year ago and did a program on the Battle of Brandywine. He's returning here on the 11th, and he'll be doing a program on the Battle of Germantown. If you're interested, there's just a few seats left on a bus trip that I'm running on November the 15th. We're going to go to the Battle of Brandywine, and he's going to serve as our step-on guide. And in addition to Brandywine in the morning, after lunch, we're going to Valley Forge, which has a new exhibit there that I'd like to see. So I'm going to take about 44 of my friends there with me on a bus and see the new exhibit. We also have a Native American Film Festival on October 17th and 18th. If you're interested, and that's a free event here at the Berks History Center. So hopefully we'll see a few faces. And we have another special event, Eagle Eyes, the Times of Our Lives in News, Photos Through 6 Decades in Berks County. Again, that's on November the 6th and the 7th. And if you go to our website, you'll find more information on that event. I'd like to take this time to introduce our new executive director, who's standing in the back. She has a few days under her belt here at the Berks History Center. Her name's Amanda McCoy, and she's a Berks County native. So we're real happy to have her here at the Berks History Center. Yay. And without any more wait, I'm going to introduce Brian Engelhardt, and please enjoy the upcoming presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. My wife says I'm a lot better by Zoom than in person because she can make a drink than without people seeing. Anyway, So I was always curious about the downtown in Penn Street, which says in 1877, amidst hard times, which U.S. readers on. Anyway, 10 people were shot. Actually, 11 died. One died a few days later. And this was a horrible thing, the Reading Railroad Massacre. I didn't know much about it. I will talk up. Is that better? Yes. Okay. But I will not lean on the podium. Anyway, the massacre, I don't know about you folks in high school. None of my history teachers got past the Civil War. So we didn't even get into the labor problems of the 1870s, never mind World War I. In any event, it was a cataclysmic event in Reading. It was part of a cataclysmic series of events across the United States. And my curiosity eventually caused me to say, I should research this and write an article about it so I can learn something. And I also wanted to remember the 10 people who were killed in the massacre, or the 11 rather. And I, at that point, found, I said this to Amber earlier, I just kept finding rabbit holes to pursue as you got in so many various things that were issues involved with this. So I'll get you all out of here by 7 o'clock. I hope, I promise. So, and the article I'm talking about in the past issue of the Berks Historical Review, titled After the Tumult. And I learned that tumult is spelled, thank goodness for my editor, Charles Adams, T-U-M-O-L, not O-L-T like I had spelled it my whole life. It's T-U-M-U-L-T. So in my first draft, I had spelled it wrong. He corrected it. Anyway, but I hope you have a chance to take a look at the article at some point. And this goes beyond it, because when the article was published, people said to me, okay, you had what would cause the strike? And and other questions that I'm going to try to address tonight too. The drama that we have, will start with the causes, the background. Why did the strike occur? What happened in it? What were the events? And then the aftermath. They had trials. They had a coroner's hearing. They had trials of rioters. So now you can read this a little better. For the Reading Railroad had endured pay cuts. Here on July 23rd, 1877, militia fired into an unarmed crowd that blocked a train, and 10 people were killed that night. One died a few days later. U.S. troops reopened the railroad. This gives you an idea that the 1877 strike wasn't just in Reading, it was a national event. Coast to coast. Concentrated in the Northeast because there was more railroads there, more people. But in any event, that just showed the expanse of the national cataclysmic event. I'll use that word again. Okay. When we talk about the railroad riot in Reading, the riots, there's just a matter of semantics. The Eagle and the Times have, there's two. There was the Sunday riot, and then there was the Monday riot. The Sunday riot, spoiler alert, I'm giving it away, was destruction of property that culminated in the bridge about 1.5 miles up the Schuylkill River, burnt for the Lebanon Valley Railroad. It was their main passenger line out of here. And there were rioters that burned it down. And then the Monday riot, excuse me, militia were called into town. National Guardsmen, that's what they called them back then. And they were not from Reading. We'll talk about that. They were from Pennsylvania, but the feeling was that if you had National Guardsmen from Reading, they knew everybody. So how are they going to act like national, how are they going to police their own neighbors? And so they had out-of-town militia. The Pennsylvania railroads of 1877, you just wanted to give you a flavor of the extent of how intricate, even in 1877, the railroads were. That was our principal way of transportation, other than wagons. Okay, leading to the strike. Incidentally, if anybody has a question, raise your hand and raise your issue. Then I don't want you to forget it. You might not have had your Prevagen today, but in any event, who knows? Who remembers learning about the Panic of 1873? You paid attention. Your teacher actually covered it. The Panic of 1873 started with a bank failure in 1873 and was a national depression that lasted more than 5 years. The hangover of that was a blight on the country and was one of the causes of the strike per se because of the negative economic climate that existed. So first you had that. The railroads cut the wages of their employees in January of 1876, 10%. And they implemented also something from each paycheck, they'd take a quarter out, which a quarter was more than bought you more than just a candy bar done by it. Anyway, they said, we're going to keep this. And at the end of the year, if you're a good employee, you'll get back this as kind of a bounty for rewarding you to be a good employee. In any event, they didn't like that. And then in the spring of 1877, the railroads had been requested by the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers to restore the pre-1876 pay scale. They said, no, we're not going to do that. And they walked out. So the locomotive engineers walked out. A major factor in the mix here was Frank B. Gowen, president of the railroad. He was a very ambitious young man who was an attorney out of Pottsville. He got involved with the railroad, was very, he quickly moved up in its ranks. He acquired coal holdings, which was against the corporate charter, but it made money, so he got away with it. They didn't stop him. And he broke a union. The Workmen's Beneficial Association was a fledgling union, but that was a battle that they strangled the union through a successful pay cut. And in the Molly Maguires, they bought into the coal country. He was very active in the battle against the Molly Maguires on behalf of the coal industry. And in their trial, he was very effective as a trial lawyer. And the height of it was his cross-examination of Blackjack Keogh, who was probably the most well-known of the Molly Maguires, and eventually was executed, and was at his height of popularity in the company and otherwise with his public image, right about the time of the 1877 strike. Yes. March 27th, 1877, I'll simplify it for you. John Wooten, the general manager of the PAR, the railroad, said, if you're a member of the Brotherhood, you will be called upon in a day or two to decide whether you decide to remain in the employment of the company. By complying with the regulation requiring you to withdraw from any association referred to. Well, anyway, so it means if you're in the Brotherhood, if you want to keep your job, you got to leave the Brotherhood. A whole lot of people in the Brotherhood left their jobs. They did that rather than work for the company. And a large number of men in Reading, which was like the hub, we'll talk about that in a second, of the Pennsylvania Railroad operations, even though its headquarters was in Philly, real operation was in Reading with the yards and the like. So anyway, that was implementing a further crisis. That's in March. Gowen had taken a trip over to England and kind of a mini vacation. He was going into some business things. What do you feel better about when you come back from a vacation than laying off a bunch of your employees? All right, that's what he decided. So Frank Gowen comes back and says gets down to his desk, says, let's say I lay off a bunch of brakemen and passenger and machinists. And a number of them worked here in Reading, particularly the machinists. But he implemented a new policy of only one passenger brakeman on each train, which really put a stress on the operation of a passenger brakeman because sometimes you have to sleep. And so having a couple helped out. Well, he had his positive ideas. So let's talk about Reading at the time. 40,000 citizens. 1,500 of those citizens were either current or former employees of the our railroad, and they also or were employed by the Coal and Iron Company, which was a related corporation. So Reading had a very heavy employment stake with the railroad in the community. As I said, the shops here were large, and it was the operational hub of that company. And what was an additional bonus with the good Dutchmen they had here, they had a lot of innovations in technical development with the mechanisms of their locomotives and train stuff that came out of the Reading shops. So some of their best people were right here. They weren't treating them as well as they might. So everybody in Reading knew somebody that worked on the railroad. And so the public sentiment was overwhelmingly in favor of the strikers and against Frank Gowen. So things started bubbling. B&O Railroad cut its wages by 10% because they wanted to get their dividends up by 10%. That cut expenses, you make more for the shareholders. Well, that started things out in the West. It's made its way. They went Illinois, Chicago and St. Louis began to have unrest. Martinsburg, West Virginia, they stopped trains and there began to be violence there. It kept going. And a word about the illustrations here. Alan Pinkerton of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who made a lot of money out of this thing because his detectives were all over the place, infiltrating meetings and the like. And who ever saw the great Sean Connery, Richard Harris film, The Molly Maguires? Yeah, it's good. First off, they're great actors, they were. And second off, it's all about the infiltration. And it really hit pretty close, but project that to Reading. And so the Pinkerton men were sitting in on meetings and watching people. In any event, so he wrote this book called Strikers, Communists, Tramps, and Detectives, which was not as sympathetic to the strikers as it might be, as you would figure. He wrote it in 1878, so it was fresh after the 1877 experience. The pictures are dramatic. There weren't photographs of stuff happening back in 1877. The local papers here didn't have many pictures in either. So I have them, and you take them as they are. Oftentimes they're pretty accurate of just dramatic events, but sometimes they're a bit prejudicial. For instance, in Baltimore, there were riots began in July 20th. 10 people ultimately were shot to death. They had militia there, state militia, came in and fired upon the crowds. And here, there was Camden Depot, Camden Yards in Baltimore. a mob tried to burn that down, and there were women leading the mob. And oh, here, I get to use this pointer. Isn't it a swell thing? Check this out. Now, that's not a very sympathetic picture of one of the women rioters. So I think he tried to portray the negative, his opponents, in a rather prejudicial way. So just, I jumped out at me as I was going through this. But in Baltimore, they had things happening. It was terrible. In the meanwhile, things are stirring in Pennsylvania, and Governor Hartranft in Pennsylvania calls out various units of the National Guard and militia to help restore order. Okay. So, this didn't work necessarily. In Pittsburgh, which was spelled without an H from 1881 until 1911, so I'm doing it officially. Yeah, and if you have any sandwiches back here, you will have French fries in it. Anyway, but the Pittsburgh, they had Pittsburgh militia out initially, and the Pittsburgh militia recognized the people, and they recognized them, and they said, "That's a nice uniform." And I had you in fourth grade, remember? And so they weren't doing any good. So they brought in militia from Philadelphia and told the Pittsburgh fellas to stand down. Well, the militia from out of town didn't know these people. And so day one, they said, well, these people aren't getting out of our way. Let's have a bayonet charge. And they had a bayonet charge into a bunch of protesters, strikers or whatever, and fired on them. About 20 people were killed, about 40 injured, and that was the first day. The second day, the militia, they were from Philadelphia, or a roundhouse, and the crowd tried to burn them out of the roundhouse and cannonaded them. And another 20 people were killed. And so in 2 days of rioting, depending on what you read, it was somewhere between 40 and 55 people were killed. A lot of people were injured as well. And but that inflamed across the state the extent of the death. And the news came to Reading, and people were very much interested in this. Yeah. Your eyes are very good. You also have a dirty mind if you can pick that kind of stuff up. But I thought, where is the orgy? Anyway, so well now you've seen my secret. Such a prude. Okay. In Altoona, trainload of reserves are coming along, National Guard, to support the National Guard further in Pittsburgh, because they're having their hands full with the rioters. And they attack the troops. Nobody's killed, but it delays. They block the trains. And so there's problems there. There's problems in Johnstown, eventually Scranton, Shamokin. Every time, there's always stuff in Shamokin. Philadelphia troops go to Harrisburg, and don't these guys look snazzy? The mob surrounds them and takes their guns and marches them around as prisoners. They were overwhelmed. There was a couple hundred of these National Guardsmen. And let's remember what the militia was. They were folks that were young and had minimal training, and they could wear a uniform, but they were nothing like what you would have in the way of a professional soldier in the United States Army, which is the solution that eventually was reached. Thanks, Vicki. Um, anyhow, Philadelphia, they had some problems. The clubbed a mob at a train depot, but more stuff's going on. So let's talk about Reading. Crowds were gathering outside the Reading Eagle office on a daily basis to look at what was coming in as far as bulletins saying about Pittsburgh and Harrisburg and people are killed. And I don't expect you to read the thing on the left, but that just shows I researched it. And Columbia Hall is a building at 9th and Penn, and that's where the strikers would meet. That's where the engineers would meet. They weren't on strike all the time, but they had meetings there, and they began to have much more frequent meetings. On Saturday, they had 2 meetings, and the question was, what was talked about in the meetings? Now, from the newspaper, they had a reporter, and they said, oh, they just talked general business. Well, they stopped talking general business. They shuffled the reporter out, and then they talked about, should we burn down the bridge? How about that? So, in any event, so you had this activity in already a highly charged environment, anti-company. And in the meanwhile, the Reading Rifles. Has anybody ever heard of the Reading Rifles? Okay. The name of the militia group in Reading. And guess where they operated out of? The PAL. I mean, the armor, what used to be the armory. But that was where they would keep their rifles and uniforms. In any event, they were called up, just like by General Hartranft. I'm saying by Governor Hartranft, they were called up to duty. And they assembled right out near the Reading Eagle building in the middle of town. Except, what happened? Only half of them show up. Because, what the heck? One of the people said, this is ridiculous to have poor men uniforms fighting with just poor men. They had no bone to pick with the strikers. They were sympathetic. They were kindred spirits. And Captain Wenrick, their leader, tried to convince the guys that did show up. He was not pro-company, but he had his orders as a captain in the National Guard to follow the orders of the governor. So they stood around, they assembled, they did a little marching. Kids and about 100 adults, mostly men, heckled them for a couple hours. And then Captain Wenrick said, you're good. You can go. And they went back home. And so they were unmustered. And we don't hear from them in any actions in town here. But those of you who are curious, what happened to them? They got sent on July 27th to Allentown. And first off, they didn't answer, a lot of them didn't answer that either. And then there was a threat to arrest people that didn't answer. But so the Reading Rifles, there was one other thing that came up, and we'll talk about that. But for our local militia then, they were not going to be involved in anything happening to try to keep the peace in town. Good. All right. So Saturday, what the Pinkerton fellow later testified in the trials that were held about people being, when they were charged with rioting, excuse me, the Pinkerton fellow said they talked about burning the bridge. They talked about where can we get a keg of powder and 50 men to blow it up. And they were instigating riots. And that was testified in the court. they hung around downtown on Saturday, and around 2 o'clock, it was written a party of men past Franklin Street where uh, they were they it was at the local halls, and saying, "Now you can join in. You all know this. There's an army of strikers determined you'll see, who will fight corporations till the country is free." All right, everybody now. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, so they were getting looped up Saturday night. Sunday was the next day. Had another gathering at Columbia Hall, and things started to happen during the afternoon, where first there was a carload of wooden shingles. Well, what's better than to light a carload of wooden shingles on fire? So they lit the carload of wooden shingles on fire, and somebody called the fire people, the fire department. And the fire department came out, and they wouldn't let the firemen through. As a matter of fact, they kind of whooped on some of the firemen that were just trying to do their job. And so Fire Chief Boyer said, "Boys, go home. They're not letting us through. They're not letting us do our job." Now, was the railroad happy to hear about this? No, but they wouldn't let the firemen do their job. People walked around tearing up railroad ties, railroad tracks, and doing other destructive things on cars. And it got to a fervor that eventually they marched out to the Lebanon Valley Railroad Bridge about a mile and a half north of town. The bypass, you say, where is that? Bypass goes over there about that now. Anyway, and about midnight, they chased the watchman away, one guy. Boy, if it was Chuck Norris, they would have never gotten through. Anyhow, they started the bridge on fire. It was wood. They had a little bit of stone here and there, but it was wood. And it made for quite a sight for miles around. But it burned out about 2 a.m. So, and we go home now. So that's what the bridge. Oh, I could use my pointer again. They rebuilt it, and that's the rebuilt bridge. And here is again, but that was before it was. That's after it was repaired, but that's the location. And so, anyhow, passenger trains use that, not freight trains. Okay. Mayor Charles Evans. No relation to the graveyard Charles Evans, except maybe he was like fourth generation. Do you know Michelle? Okay. Anyway, the mayor of Reading, thank you, was Charles Evans. And on Friday, he and the wife said, that's in Pittsburgh, all that stuff. Let's go down to Ocean City and get away for a weekend. So he's down in Ocean City, getting away for a weekend. And in the middle of the night, he gets a telegraph from Sheriff Yorgi in Reading. Him on the right. They burnt down because the only people that can call out militia legally under the law at that time were the mayor and the sheriff. Police Chief Cullen, who was a Civil War hero, guy on the left there, and a square shooter. everybody in the Reading administration of officials. Some were a little thick, but they were honest, sincere people, including Sheriff Yorgi. Cullen walked around and took a straw poll of the people he talked to and said, well, what do you think? Because he was thinking, maybe I should see if we can get a posse. Now, the police chief of Reading didn't have the authority to do it, but he was doing the homework for the sheriff and the mayor. And just about 75% of anybody he talked to said, no, I don't want to be in a posse. I'm in favor of the strikers. So Yorgi had spoken to some people, and after talking to Cullen, he said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to issue a proclamation. So he proclaimed that everybody should stay in their house. Yeah. He said, do not riot. Do not destroy property. Stay at home. Nobody listened. It was published on page 4 of the Reading Times. It was posted, not even page 1. It was posted around town at some places, but that didn't work out very well. So people continued to do stuff. And who was very dissatisfied with this? Oh, after Mayor Evans got the telegram, he sent back, even though this is the middle of the night, I can't get back until 11 o'clock Monday night because of all the train confusion between here and there. I can't get back to Reading quick enough. So they passed the city council motion Monday morning that said, when you get back, you will assume the power vested in you to quell all mobs and riots. Okay? You hear that, Mayor? So that was, city council did their thing. All right. So General Manager Wooten, the guy that wrote the letter that made everybody happy, he, I got to talk faster. He talks to Yorgi and says, well, what are you going to do? You're going to have a posse? You're going to have a posse? And Yorgi says, no, you crazy, man. And he basically says, nobody would be in the posse. Nobody, they would be totally ineffective. So he goes to Philadelphia and talks with his boss, President Gowan, and says they won't do anything. And Gowan says, well, we should contact one of our generals. Oh, wait, that's a different guy that talked like that. Anyway, he said, we should contact General William Bolton. I know him. He's head of the Pennsylvania National Guard. Tell him we need help in Reading. Now, people that can do this are the sheriff and the mayor. But whatever. He contacts General Bolton, sends him a telegram, and General Bolton says, okay. And he contacts General Frank Reeder, who is in charge of the 4th Pennsylvania, and says, I want you and a group of your volunteers, the National Guard, which is about 300 men, to go to Reading and address this situation. Address it. They were from Allentown, Hamburg, Easton, Slatington, Catasauqua, and Portland. And Hamburg seemed like pretty far away back then. They weren't from Reading. So General Reeder and the boys that he brings up, 300 of them, they arrive July 23rd, Monday, at the outer station out at, everybody know where the outer station used to be here? Who doesn't? Okay. at 6th and Oley Street, you know where the Reading YMCA, the Railroad YMCA used to be? Now it's Hope Rescue, right? That is, yeah. The outer station was in the area that now is like there's a grocery store there, but it was a huge area and the railroad yards were there.
It was city services.
Go ahead.
City services. That's where actually still where the station was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Public Works.
You. Anyway, they get there and at that point, there was a passenger train down at Franklin Street Station full of passengers and a mob around it, not letting it pass. And there a couple of cops were there trying to dissuade the mob, but they weren't letting it pass. So the troops disembarked at the outer station about 5:30, 5:30, 5:45, and they march in a column down the railroad tracks, intending to relieve the train down at Franklin Street. Bad idea, as Arnold Schwarzenegger said in one of his movies. So, my slow pointer. Yeah, here's the outer station up there. Here's the train. It seems simple. Yeah, just walk down a little ways. And then we go to the next one. And up close, what the problem is that all along the way, when she got downtown at the railroad cut down at Walnut Street, you had walls. And what the people were doing, women, men, kids, had rocks and stones, and they were breaking bones and hitting people on the head. But they would go behind the wall, go up, throw some stuff, then duck down. So these soldiers that were marching down, these young, inexperienced, untrained people, had a leader that had been very successful in the Civil War, but he forgot to do something. He forgot to cover their flanks. Nobody was watching the people on the walls. So they were very vulnerable to all of this activity, stones and the like. And excuse me. Yeah. Didn't miss anything good. And so you can see, going back, you're here, it basically shows there's the soldiers and there's the people up on the walls defended on the high ground, and they can duck down. So they felt pretty vulnerable, and they were young and away from their home in Slatington. So what did they do? They opened fire. Nobody gave an order. They panicked. And that was the criticism of using the militia, because they were not tempered like federal troops were towards dealing with conflict. They reacted. And it wasn't always wise reaction. So within a couple minutes, 5 people were dead on the street. 5 people were mortally wounded to die that night. 50, 60 people were injured, and they were afraid to say how injured they were because they didn't know whether they'd be arrested as a rioter. One other fellow died later, but that's what that's a pretty accurate depiction, I think, of what happened. In the meantime, the rioters go to the armory, 4th and Walnut, I guess that is. Huh?
On your previous
No, the
article showed with the men. That armory in Walnut Street wasn't built till like 1910.
Okay.
1909.
Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Politica, who knows about Reading much more than I do. In any event, oh, I didn't realize. Well, whatever. They broke into the armory and they took all the rifles. Captain Wenrick, thinking that they were somewhat vulnerable, took the mechanisms out of all of the rifles. So what they had was just rifles, and they left them strewn around Reading. And so within 2 days, the Reading Rifles recovered about 90% of the guns that had been stolen. They also recovered guns from the Hamburg militia, because the Hamburg militia said, I don't want anything to do with this. And people took them aside, made them march up and down, and they threw their guns away. And some people said, can you give me some pants and a shirt? And they changed out of their uniforms and gave their uniforms to people, and ran out with civilian clothes. So it was not a good night for the militia that night in Reading. The one thing, Captain Scott of Portland, there was an item in the paper. He lost his valise. Now the captain, why is he carrying a suitcase along with his clothes in? But he dropped it when all the things got crazy at the railroad cut. Somebody found it, but they saw what was going on. They were irritated. So the crowd tore up all of his clothes, destroyed his clothes. And so he slept in his uniform that night. Okay. The next day, the headlines in the Eagle and the Times, bloodbath in Reading. It also highlighted what was still going on in Pittsburgh, because they were just getting news feeds of the second day of violence out there, and 5 policemen. And a woman here said that she is the descendant of one of the policemen. 5 policemen were shot by the militia. They just shot into the crowd. They didn't care who the heck they hit. Fortunately, none of the policemen died, but bullets are bullets. One of the things that I found driving to me was these people died, and I wanted them to be remembered. So they were predominantly young, two of where they died. There was only one person over 40. And 5 left widows and children. They were just out watching stuff happen as bystanders for the most part. And suddenly they were dead. Henry Corbett, down in the lower right-hand corner there, he died a few days later from somebody opened up the window in his room, his hospital room, and he caught pneumonia, and as a result of his weakened state. But so he was as much. There's an 18-year-old that died. You can see that some are at St. Peter's, most are at Allenbach's and Charles Evans. And you see the age, 21, 32, 23, 34, 31. Only one guy's 53. Well, one's 54. I lied. But these were young men. No women were shot, but that's fortunate. They were out there. So in any event, the others were injured. Rutherford B. Hayes and We only have a little bit left. President, he is more interesting as you read more about him. He took the troops out of the South and ended Reconstruction, but he was wounded in the Civil War as a Union soldier and was very much abolitionist and very much wanted the rights of Black people to be preserved. But it was realpolitik. Anyhow, he sent the federal troops in because of the chaos that was reigning in. And it was fairly universal. People were killed by militia. Nobody was shot by federal troops. Same rioters. In Reading, the militia left at about 4 o'clock Tuesday, and the feds came in. So it was appropriate that happened. And people stopped tearing stuff apart. I think it was a shock with the wave of death that hit the city. Samuel Kurtz, a heroic episode here. In our archives here, we have those things to your right. His shotgun, his billy club, and a couple bullets that were picked up. He was a Union Army surgeon in the Civil War. He was born in 1832. And he was also a deputy sheriff. So he was out there with the shotgun and the billy club to keep order from anybody that was doing stuff. But then when Corbett was wounded, Dr. Kurtz used his Civil War battlefield triage to stop the bleeding. And unfortunately, the negligent person that opened up the window and caused him to get pneumonia. Well, but anyway, Kurtz lived to be 88, practiced medicine until just about then. And that was a heroic episode. Right now, our archive stuff is up in the Museum of the American Revolution, I think it's called, in Boston. I want to exhibit commemorating the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. It'll be up there for another year or so. But it was heroic. About 56 people were indicted for riot and destruction of property. But they started arresting people immediately. There you have a picture of a striker getting arrested. Okay. July 27th, which my birthday, the coroner's jury convenes, and it's going to be a lot of work. He's going to have a lot of investigating to do, because how did these people die? Why did they die? Well, the coroner's jury found they were people shot by militia. Okay. Thank you. Anyway, they were shot by militia, but this is Dr. George Goodhart was the coroner. He had become coroner in 1876, and he would be coroner until 1878. But he was an interesting fellow, traveled around the United States, but in any event, he said, we have a lot of investigating to do. In the meanwhile, Sheriff Yorgi decides he's going to appoint a posse, and he gets General Gregg and Captain Maltzberger and Captain Hoffendietz and two other former Civil War heroes that were captains, and organizes in the Reading area 5 districts in the city and has General Gregg in charge. By this time, what shall I say, the party's pretty much over, but it might have been a good idea to do this organizing maybe a week earlier. But that just, Sheriff Yorgi was up to it. Coroner's verdict. Wasn't any fault of the troops. It was only human nature, when you're getting hit by sticks and stones, to shoot guns at people. So the coroner's verdict said that basically the rioters brought it on themselves. And it was kind of like the verdict at Kent State. But they said you shouldn't criticize these militia people. They were doing the best they could. And that's what it said. But Sheriff Yorgi could have all of this stuff if he just would have gotten a posse together instead of doing this namby-pamby proclamation. So what comes next? The riot trials. You can't tell a defendant apart without a scorecard. So the indictments, 6 indictments were ultimately filed with regard to the various acts against the people that were charged with destruction of property or rioting or inciting to riot. 32 charged with riotous proceedings. Some people were charged with just one thing. Some people were charged with multiple things. Renaissance people. Anyway, 45 people charged with riotous proceedings, 17 charged with tearing up railroad, 4 people charged with destroying telegraph poles, 5 people charged with burning cars, I'm going to change that, and cabooses, and 16 people charged with breaking forcibly into the armory and stealing rifles that were useless. So that's the scorecard. Now we got to adjudicate it. So it starts on October 1st. The Sunday riots begin to be adjudicated. The first trial. Oh, and presiding over it is Judge Sassaman, who's relatively young, and he's new to the bench, but he was an even-tempered man, so saith his peers at the time, and 43 years old. District Attorney Reber on the right there was in charge of the prosecution of the various rioters, but just to make sure that he would do things okay, just to give him some help, the venerable and eminent George Baer gave him assistance on the left here, who was the general counsel to the P&R Railroad, named for the Baer, it's namesake for the Baer building downtown. He eventually would become president, but at this point he was just general counsel. And they also had assistance from Franklin Gowan. He would assist in the prosecution. He wanted to recapture his glory from the days with the Molly Maguires. And so he had a real agenda started. And upward they went with the prosecution. First trial, 7 men are charged with burning the Lebanon Valley Bridge, one of whom is engineer Hiram Nachrieb, a leader in the Brotherhood. And he is Frank Gowan's #1 target. This guy, Nachrieb, was a leader. Gowan wanted to get him. He wanted to get him bad. And he was focused on getting Nachrieb convicted. Nachrieb testified, he's 35 years old. He's a member of the Brotherhood. He was at Columbia Hall in a meeting when actions were discussed, but he said he wouldn't support. At the meeting, he said, "I will not support unlawful actions." And I was present when they burnt the bridge down, but I was just watching. I was just there with a friend. Frank Gowan went through his withering cross-examination and said, he got him to say, "Well, you admit you were at the bridge, and you admit you were with the people there, and you admit that you saw it." And he said, "Yeah, that's what I admitted." I said, "Did you say anything to incite people?" He said, "No, I didn't do that." So anyway, the Eagle loved Frank Gowan. Just a critique of his courtroom technique. First, they said he was youthful looking with a large and well-developed head. Handsome and attractive. So, anyhow, he puts questions to witnesses and does it in a very pleasant and genial manner with his pleasant demeanor, only interrupted when a tilt with the counsel for the defense brings him to his feet, and then he viciously responds. And then the pleasant demeanor comes back. So, like him. They think he's great. He has a resplendent smile. Okay. So he cross-examines Snockreve, and this is so Knockreve, they say, oh, you may be excused. Knockreve gets up from the witness stand, looks over at Gow and says, you got any more questions for me, Mr. Gow? Is that all you got? No, he didn't say that, but it was kind of like that. But he said, do you have any other questions? So anyway, the verdict. And then plead guilty. They confessed in the court hearing, yeah, we burnt the bridge down. And they get reduced sentences, reduced from 10 years to 5 years, and reduced from $2,000 fine to $1,000 fine. And Knockreve and all the other defendants are acquitted. What does that show? That shows people in Reading are sympathetic to their fellow townsmen. And Frank Gowan's smile, I think, went away. He didn't participate in any of the other trials. And the Berks County's treatment of these defendants caused his smile to disappear between a dark and foreboding cloud every time he learned the results of yet another trial. Well, quick. So there's another trial, starts October 12th. 14 guys, 14 men. Goodhart saved somebody's life. He runs a bar down at 7th and near 7th and Franklin, which wasn't like it is now. But in any event, he pulled the fellow out from in front of a train in June, so he was a hero. All this having been said, 13 people out of the 14 were acquitted, except for poor Goodhart, because he had said to a reporter, yeah, I said, we should go down and get the, he talked to a reporter. It was silly. You should never talk to reporters, right? Anyway, the long and short of it is Goodhart's the only one convicted. He got a lesser sentence, and everybody else is acquitted. Oh boy. Now I have another bunch of people coming up towards the end of October, and 41 defendants. And the DA said, and the judge said, maybe we can move these over to the November term. So they did. And in November, they said, maybe we should move these over to the January term. And in the meanwhile, 22 of them just had their cases dismissed, because what the court said was, it seems that people aren't interested in moving these people ahead. So we're down to, I told you I'd get you out of here relatively soon. January trial. The newspapers are tired of this. Riot cases again, and 2 big cases for trial. The riot cases, but the other cases, the mayor of Reading is getting sued for some criminal activity of like bribes and stuff. So that's pushing the riot stuff off the page. And so ultimately, the verdict of the final trial, 5 people plead guilty. That's all that was left. And the court imposes fines of $1 and a couple months that start when they were arrested. So the score sheet came, that's it. That was all the trials. You have a couple people plead guilty in the beginning, a couple people plead guilty in the end, and Goodhart, 70 people. That's not so good. But there still has to be, the legislators got to get in on this. The legislative committee gets together. They have hearings in Pittsburgh, Altoona, and Reading. They come out here and they have a hearing in the Mansion House, free lunch. And everybody criticized Sheriff Yorgi. And bottom line is Sheriff Yorgi wasn't there at the hearing. By that time, he had retired. The final legislative committee report that came out that said Sheriff Yorgi was wrong. He was censured. And they said there was no sufficient provocation, or there's nothing to justify criticizing our fine national, take away the pride of the militia instead of finding fault unnecessarily. So let's stand by our boys in the militia. That was the final report. So, postscript, Dr. Goodhart retires. He dies in 1908. Sheriff Yorgi retires right after this, and he dies in 1906. He goes back to his farm where he always wanted to be. Chief Cullen lives till be 80 in 1925. Judge Sassaman dies of a stroke very young at age 61. And Mary Evans, like all mayors of Reading until Karen Miller, only served one term, then he was voted out of office. And now, George Bear moved the postscript with the railroad officials. He dies very suddenly. He's 72. He's an eminent citizen in Reading. He supports lots of causes. And he named for the Bear, or the Bear Building's named for him. But there you go. So George, that's him. And Frank Gowen. He goes down to Washington, puts a nice suit on, goes to a swanky hotel, stands in front of a mirror, and blows his brains out with a Smith & Wesson. Although there was a question. Was it murder or was it a stage suicide? But the ultimate it was a suicide. So Frank Gowen, he lost. In the meanwhile, the railroad went bankrupt. He lost his position as president. He was kicked out. George Bear became the president. And it's a sad end unless you were paying attention to Frank Gowen during the way he led his life. So that's the hotel that he died in. Postscript, real quick. The railroad strike. What stopped it? That's a question I've had. It didn't stop for any positive reason. It stopped because the strikers were bludgeoned by the soldiers, not bludgeoned, but they were overwhelmed by the federal troops. And economically, they did not have much negotiating power with the power of the railroad. Finally, enlightenment did come, and management of the railroads did begin to recognize the legitimacy of people not starving with the wages that they get. But it wasn't instant, and it wasn't like everybody coming to a table saying, oh my God, this was horrible. No, it was a slow process. What did it accomplish? I just pretty much said that. It encapsulated for everybody, if they took a step back, why it does pay to have proper negotiations and not just try to squeeze the hell out of people. And what was its effect for Reading? Aside from suddenly having bunch of fatherless families. The name of the first convention of the Knights of Labor was held in Reading on January 1st, 1878. Because of the attention this drew to the city. The Knights of Labor was a very important organization for the 50 years or so as the American labor union movement grew stronger. And Reading was, for that period of time, a very prominent city for leadership in labor. Look at the culture of Reading. We had the socialist mayor. The second city in Reading, or in the United States, was in Reading. I think the first was in Milwaukee. But in any event, that was the effect, and that the men went back to work, working for the railroad, and that was the railroad strike. Thanks for listening.